I'll call the meeting to order and request a roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoff is absent. Ms. Kalinowski? Here. Mr. Bush?
Here.
Vice President Darrow?
Here.
President McClellan?
Here. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. To tonight's agenda, do we have any additions or corrections?
No, we do not.
With none, could I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Darrow and Ms. Kalinowski, roll call, please.
Vice President Darrow?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski? Yes. Mr. Bush?
Yes.
President McClellan?
Yes. That takes us to discussion items. Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClellan. Board of Education members, this evening we're going to begin with an update for mid-year progress towards the 2018-19 Continuous Improvement Plan to give information specifically to the progress towards the benchmark goals that were established by the Board of Education. You have a copy of the presentation in the green folder at your seat. Jess Mamias, the Coordinator of Assessment and Accountability, is going to lead the conversation this evening to walk you through the benchmark goals based upon the analysis completed by the leadership team, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Mrs. Mamias.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to go over the 7 benchmarks on the CIP. We'll go through them in order, 1 through 7. The first several deal with achievement. Just a reminder, not that we need a reminder, that our benchmark number 1 is to increase our performance index rank as compared to other Ohio school districts from 19 to 17. So when we look at our progress monitoring and we look at our mid-year check to see, are we on track to meeting benchmark 1? We're going to break this down into 2 sections. In my English language arts, this is your ELA. So we give MAP assessments in grades 2 through 8 for ELA. Through MAP studies, they're able to correlate a MAP score into a OST performance level. And so at mid-year, MAP is able to provide projections on how students, based upon their winter MAP score, how they should perform on the spring assessment. A couple things to remember. When we talk about MAP testing, it is all multiple choice. There is no no writing on the MAP assessment, and there's very little tech-enhanced questions. They're typically multiple choice or drag and drop, where the Ohio State test has a portion on writing and has significantly more technology-enhanced items. So while it is a good correlation, we have to keep in mind that it isn't a direct correlation to the state tests. So based upon the reading, when we look at the projections for ELA, for the primary school, we saw an increase in the number of students meeting promotion requirements with the fall OST. When comparing winter MAP scores from 2018 to winter 2019, there was an increase in the number of students projected in accelerated and advanced proficiency levels. Fall OSTs, we saw an increase in the percentage of students meeting the fall reading promotion scores. So when we look at this, with the fall OSTs, these projections, we would say that the primary school is on track. For the intermediate, projected proficiency for ELA did decrease. Intermediate staff have used the MAP scores, OST projections to identify areas of strength and areas of focus. Grade level teams are working with coaches to embed formative assessments to monitor student progress towards meeting their goals. For the middle school, there are a similar number of students meeting proficient or above on the projections compared to last year. Students that have been identified at the middle school as needing additional help have been placed in some additional ELA support class. And those particular students, if we look at our most at-risk students, all exceeded their MAP projections from fall to winter. So that additional support is helping those students move towards grade level expectations. For high school, all 9th graders took a practice style ELA 1 test. Teachers were then able to use the information from that midterm type assessment to identify areas of strengths and weaknesses, all of the questions were aligned to state standards, and so they could identify key areas to work on for the second semester. ELA 2 teachers, so your 10th grade teachers, also provided used a common assessment for midterms for writing. So when we talk about ELA, there's always a reading and a writing section. ELA 2, based upon our item analysis at the beginning of the year, really focused on writing. And so their common assessment was, again, focused on that writing portion, and teachers continue to use that information to guide instruction. For math, again, we can look at these projections, where students are in their winter scores to a projected spring score. One thing to keep in mind is that MAP makes a projection to a grade level assessment. So for a student that is sitting in 4th grade but will take a 5th grade assessment in the spring, these projections don't necessarily, they correlate to a 4th grade test, not to a 5th grade test. So while it gives us a great foundation of where they are, it doesn't necessarily correlate to the test that they will take. But with that in mind, primary, we saw an increased number of students projected proficient or higher compared to last year. Analysis of the MAP data, students identified at risk are receiving additional support in small groups or individuals with instructional coaches. At the intermediate, we have an increased number of students projected proficient or higher compared to last year. And there continues to be a strong emphasis on helping students meet and exceed their goals. Item analysis of Ohio State tests and formative assessments have helped to guide instruction, in particular at the intermediate for math. Middle, we saw an increased number of students projected proficient or higher compared to last year. And again, just like in ELA, we have a targeted math intervention class. And with those students, they all met and exceeded their projected growth from fall to winter for MAP. In addition, when we look at those particular 29 students that are in that intervention math class, we see an increase in overall grades within their math class. So not only do we see an increase in MAP scores, but also seeing better performance within their grade level math. For high school, this is the first year of using MAP for Algebra 1 and Geometry, where last year we used it very specifically for the connections classes. We gave MAP math to all Algebra 1 and Geometry students at the high school this year. So while we can't compare directly to last year's scores, students were meeting and exceeding projections from fall to winter. With that as well, MAP does not provide projections to course specific exams. So it isn't going to give me a projection to an Algebra 1 or to a Geometry. It's just those grades 3 through 8 assessments. Benchmark 2, facilitate a year or more of growth for every year of instruction. So we're really looking at where are students starting and where are they going. So again, I talked about those projections and those observed growth. MAP or NWEA establishes growth projections for students for winter and spring. So based upon their fall assessment, MAP puts a target of the number of RIT points that they should increase come winter and come spring. So for a typical 4th grader, this is normed nationally, a typical 4th grader will gain 5.4 RIT points from fall to winter, and then from winter to spring, 2.3. So this just gives you an idea. They break it, they're nationally normed, and what those projections should look like. On the graph, the middle of the diamond represents the average projected growth for the grade level. The top of the bar chart represents the average observed growth for the grade level. For reading, which is your top graph, 3rd, 7th, and 8th grade, observed growth was higher than the projected growth. For 4, 5, and 6, observed growth was lower than projected. I've met with the intermediate administrators in January to review the MAP data. With the implementation of writing units of studies in grades 1 through 6, the scope and sequence of topics in ELA have been adjusted. And there were areas when we looked at the substrands within ELA, were areas that had been moved to accommodate So still covering all of the scope and sequence, but things may have shifted within the school year. So starting in January, ELA teachers at the intermediate have been checking student performance on different standards using quick formative checks. So on those standards that were lower on the winter map score for the intermediate, teachers are being very purposeful and checking in on where students are on those particular standards, and then they're adjusting instruction accordingly. For math, all grade levels observed scores are greater than their projected scores. Again, like I said, projections are not made for 11th graders. And for the most part, when we look at Ohio State tests, we're really looking at on grade level students through grade level 10. So while we do have juniors that take the MAP assessment, they're either move-ins or a student that may just be off sequence. Benchmark 3, we're going to meet or exceed the state's gap closing standards for identified subgroups. So when we talk about gap closing, we don't just look at the grade levels that are assessed on the local report card. We start all the way, we look at our subgroups starting in our little ones and our kindergartners at the ELC. There has been a focus on the multiracial and the African American student subgroup. 38 of 52 students have met their mid-year reading goal. Of the 14 not meeting goals, 7 are already receiving reading support. Intervention meetings based upon winter data collection is ongoing, and reviews to support those other 7 students. For the primary, the building data teams have met with smaller groups of teachers and individual teachers to help with understanding building-wide data and student-level data. Starting this year, students have had access to Lexia, a reading program, and Redbird, a math program. We have an educational assistant at the primary building that helps with Lexia. So it's a new reading program that is being implemented. This staff member monitors student use, does individual pullout for students that are not necessarily moving towards on topics, and helps support teachers with that Lexia implementation for students within the classroom. So we're being very targeted in the students that we are helping with these additional programs that we've added. At the intermediate, grade level teams have worked with admin to disaggregate the MAP data. They did a significant amount of work after the winter MAP reports came back to look at strand data by grade and by subgroup. For example, the 5th grade and 6th grade teams analyzed OST projections and performance matters and subgroup data to reflect upon supports and in place for students and what revisions needed to be made. For the middle school intervention classes that I have already spoken about in English and math, those particular students are receiving individualized support, and we see an increase in their RIT score from fall to winter. In the high school, we have the connections classes. Those students as compared, so if I compare connections from last year to connections this year, our students last year struggled to reach their projected RIT scores from fall to winter. This year, all of our students in the connections classes in algebra and geometry exceeded their projected goals. Benchmark 4, graduate students who are college and career ready. Our juniors take the ACT next Wednesday, February 20th. So all juniors will be taking the test in the intermediate gym. So the national February test was this past Saturday, the 9th, but we have state and district-wide testing on the 20th. We have offered 2 boot camps. We offered one, there was a snow day, so it was February 2nd. It was a Saturday. And then we are offering another boot camp this Thursday, February 14th during the school day. We've also encouraged all students, provided opportunities for students to log in and to create accounts through ACT Academy, which is their free, you put in your pre-ACT scores, you take these quizzes, it then provides you individualized modules to increase your overall ACT score. Benchmark 5, enhance school culture and social emotional well-being. We've done the Hanover Substance Usage Survey that was completed, and the results have not been returned. We should be receiving those shortly. The SEL survey is, once we receive the results back from the substance usage, right? The social emotional learning survey will be administered. And lastly, we have the end of year. So we did a beginning of the year technology survey. We'll do another technology survey for students in May. Benchmark 6, demonstrate sustainable fiscal management. To date, identified $499,821.15 in reductions.
To be exact.
Well, yes. And benchmark 7, community engagement, Superintendent Sawyers and Treasurer Jenkins have been at the coffee and conversations along with Assistant Superintendent Lawton, I believe.
I went to
Mr.
one.
McCullough was there as well. Intermediate school technology, we did the one-on-one technology parent survey that is ongoing. We're still collecting responses. There will be the board survey for parents and communities coming this spring, and then we'll do the staff climate survey in May. That's kind of really quick mid-year check for the CIP. So any questions or comments?
Let's go back and start at benchmark 1. I think you talked about this a little bit. Maybe this is as good as benchmark 2 with MAP data. Students that are taking accelerated classes, are they included in the results?
So I've included them in, yes, they're in there. But like I said, MAP only projects to on grade level. So when I look at an accelerated student, they're saying they're going to get advanced in 4th grade math, but they'll be taking the 5th grade test.
Okay.
And when I looked at those last year, when I compared the projections to the actual grade level, even though MAP projects them to the actual grade level, they were about 85% projections to the test that they actually took. So even though the projection said advanced for 4th grade math, 85% of the time it hit advanced when they sat for the 5th grade math test.
So do you, and I know you briefly mentioned this too, but just to clarify, do you, and I am jumping ahead, I guess, to the second benchmark too, at the intermediate level, is there a reason for the decrease at the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade? Any idea about the current, what that current decrease would be attributed to?
Like I said, I sat down with the intermediate team. We actually sat down over winter break because they gave the assessment in December and really kind of sit down and tried to have conversations about what potential reasons. And one of the things that we looked at, like I said, was when MAP doesn't just give us an actual risk score, it will break it down into sub areas like literary text, informational text. And when we looked at the areas that dropped for us, they kind of correlated to this reshuffling of some of the curriculum that was being taught. So where last year they would have, this particular one was informational text for 4th grade, where they would have hit that hard prior to MAP, it was moved to after the MAP assessment. So while it dropped, we also recognize that the scope and sequence, we're still going to wrap that particular information in. And for the 4th grade team, when I talked about those weekly checks, they actually honed in on the areas that were the lowest on the MAP. So those formative assessments, those quick checks that they've been doing every week have been aligned to that informational text. So really have done kind of a deep dive to try to figure out what the issue was. Not that an issue, but how can we address it moving forward?
So is there an expectation then that because of the shuffling, we get to the end of the year and they're taking the other tests, we should see numbers come back up?
Yes. So one of the things when I MAP says there's projections and they heavy load the growth from fall to winter. in all grade levels. So when we looked at fourth grade, hang on, I want to make sure I give you the right numbers. From fall to winter, national average is a 5.4 increase. But from winter to spring is only a 2.3. Because we were very early in that testing window, we should be able to catch up to that 7.8 from December to March when we test again.
So just to that end, to help the board understand the timeline, when was MAP administered last year and when was MAP administered this year?
It's a great question. So last year, we administered MAP to the intermediate and the primary in January, the second or third week in January. And due to some feedback that we received from teachers, and the timeliness that we got that scores back didn't allow us enough time to help target instruction from February on. So we actually moved the MAP window for primary and intermediate to December. So that way we had our scores back prior to the beginning of second semester, and we could do a more targeted grouping of students for the entire semester. So now it really helped us target which kids we needed to work on. The day before break, I was at the intermediate and we were kind of going through all the data and prioritizing which students absolutely needed the individualized support. So when we came back in January, it started from day one.
Is the story the same for fifth and sixth?
Yeah, just a
In terms
little
of
bit different
timing?
strands. Yeah, same thing. Yep.
The unit of study with the movement of the test.
Why did we elect to use MAP for all Algebra 1 and geometry this year?
I think when we piloted it with the connections classes last year, and when the teachers actually finally got into it to see the amount of information that was provided to them, they actually came and said, we want to test all of our freshmen or all of our Algebra 1 and geometry students. And so it really came out of a teacher request because they saw the value of the data that came out of the MAP assessment.
That raises another question. Since you've been providing, been the resource for data collection and analysis, have you seen, I don't want it to be a leading question. What have you seen in terms of staff interest in the process? Because initially, you know, it's different, right? We hadn't historically been that data driven. So initially, what was the response, and then what is the difference in how staff is looking at it today?
At any particular level or as a whole?
It's a general question, so however you want to answer it.
I would say depending on the building. I mean, I would say every single building has grown in their data literacy. You know, I would say at the high school this year has been, we've grown a lot in terms of just understanding the data that's in front of us, understanding what the report card tells us. So really enhancing that data literacy across the board. And it looks differently based upon the building. So like I said, just a basic understanding of the report card at the high school, all the way to a deep dive into item analysis and looking at multiple sources of data at the intermediate building.
Is it generally accepted and valued as opposed to fear and concern?
I would like to think so. I think it's definitely been learning curve for everybody. But now that teachers have gotten more used to the data, I think we can have much better conversations. You know, just a conversation this morning at the primary building in terms of what are we looking at? How are we moving forward? How can we use our current formative assessments that were in front of them to guide our next step of instruction?
So what prompted this line of questioning was the answer to the question about why you started using it for Algebra 1 kids. Yeah. And the answer was the staff pulled you there, right? Yeah. They wanted it. So I'm trying to get a sense for whether that is whether that's an odd thing or whether it's becoming more common that folks are looking, that staff is looking for that sort of feedback and information.
I think it's becoming more common, and if they know that it's there and how can they get it, they're going to ask that question. Where can I grab that information?
Okay. Is there anything we can do to help that process? Encourage it even more, or should we just let you and
I
your
think
team keep it up?
We have data coaches this year in every building, and we have administrators that are using the data. So I think right now we are helping all staff understand where the data is, and they keep asking. So we need to just keep up that curiosity.
That's a good thing. So I think that's terrific. I had one other question on ACT. Do you have any way, are we tracking which students are availing themselves of either the boot camps and or the sign up to be able to do testing online, sample testing or practice testing online?
So I can track the boot camps. I have registrations for those. ACT Academy, because it's a free resource, we don't have that ability at this point in time. I did attend the ACT State Conference and learned a lot more about how we can use it as a district and how we could potentially start tracking that information. We're just not there yet.
So how many students have taken the boot camp and how many are signed up for the next one?
So I don't remember
What percentage?
so the numbers changed for February 2nd because of the snow day. So I don't know the exact number, but when I looked this morning, there was over 75 that were signed up for Thursday.
Plus or minus 100 typically that we see for registration for the boot camp itself. And then Jess did request the ability for ACT to give a report to the district level relative to the free resources, but we don't have access to it unless they create the report and they're willing to provide access to it. But it is a request that Jess has made so that, because we have the similar question, we have no way to know how many kids are actually using the new resource that's put in place this year by ACT. Be it at middle school or high school in preparation for the high school ACT or the PSAT in preparation for what they would choose to sit for and looking at ACT versus SAT and maximizing their use of those resources. But right now we don't have a way to know.
So 100 out of, it's 11th graders.
So roughly 375.
But it's not just 11th graders that are taking the boot camp.
Right.
You still have seniors, depending on what their scholarship aspirations are for even an early entrance. If they were accepted, it could change scholarship opportunities by continuing to try to raise their ACT score. So there are seniors that do go to the boot camp.
And don't we offer it to sophomores too?
It's open
Yeah.
to the high school.
So it's hard to track like direct correlation to improvement because, for example, I think Lauren took it her sophomore year and she probably wouldn't retake it now. So I think she, had taken it right around the first time she took ACTs. So it would be hard to really tell if she improved based on the boot camp. So there's multiple opportunities to sign up for the boot camp. It would be interesting to see over the lifetime of a high school student how many take advantage of the boot camp.
The practices clearly produce better testing outcomes.
Yes.
Right.
And there's more opportunities. So juniors taking it, they have multiple opportunities to take it before they have to do their college applications, right? It isn't just
The ACT?
the ACT.
Yes.
So, anything we can do to encourage, really encourage kids to avail themselves of these opportunities is something that I would want to make sure that we do. That starts with knowing how hard we have to push, right? If it's a quarter of kids availing themselves of it, that's one number. If it's 75%, that's another one, and it changes what sorts of actions we would need to take.
The junior year, just as a reminder, is the only year that provides the free ACT administration. So the fee is waived by the state because it comes to the school district. So the school district actually registers the students for participation because it's free. So they get one free sitting for the ACT. Short of that, it is a parent fee for the kid to participate. But Phil is right. There are kids that take the ACT test multiple times. And practice does have an impact. Participation in the boot camp that Debbie talked about has an impact. Taking the ACT online prep free classes also has an impact.
Absolutely.
The videos are actually very informative to the kids. If they would sit down and do that prior to taking the ACT, there are specific strategies. It's not just a content test. It is a strategy test.
Absolutely.
So you have to understand the methodology and it will change your score.
I'd love to have that data so we know how hard how much more we need to be doing to help kids take advantage of the opportunities, because it makes a difference.
Yeah, we can try to find that out through surveys of the high school, because we do some things with them. The other question we had, and we don't currently have it, but we can ask the kids that are now going through boot camp, from just an experience standpoint, if you've participated in boot camp and you've done the new online opportunities that are available from ACT for free, what's the difference for you as a participant? Is it the face-to-face with the instructor in boot camp, or did you find doing the online modules and the videos and the practice questions that walk you through the video series as an online learning environment? How did that work for you? Just to understand from a student perspective what the differences are in their learning experience and the online platform versus the face-to-face with the boot camp instructor.
On our parent informational nights, do we highlight some of this stuff? Okay.
And there's separate communications that go out, like the boot camp one specifically went to high school parents as a communication to try to put it back in front of parents that if your child has never done this and they're going to be taking the ACT, we would strongly encourage you to consider this. And then we added this year the new online resources that ACT released, because we've done a hard push on those because they're free and they can be done anywhere at any time. It's not localized to a Saturday boot camp. It's anytime you want to, you can access those modules and not have to do them all at one time.
Would it be improper to somehow make signing up and taking one of those practice things online homework? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I don't know that we can go there. So we'd have to think about options, but maybe a different incentive. You get into the basketball game for free. I don't know, but we could probably come up with some incentive, but I don't know that it's a homework assignment.
Yes, you might have said this right before I walked in, but on the MAP scores for ELA and math, I know we talk about trying to continually move to the right. Do these scores reflect, if these project out as you project, will we move to the right versus prior year?
So anytime we go above that proficient, when we talk about the weighting, so the greater the number of students that we have in accelerated and advanced, the higher our PI. So I did do some behind the scene PI calculations for ELA and math. For the most part, each building did go up. Primary went up in ELA and math. Intermediate stayed the same, pretty much for ELA, went up in math. And the middle school pretty much stayed the same or went up. So when we talk about those projections, we have the greater number of students in that accelerated and advanced, we're going to see a PI go up.
And the two cautions in the data, though, are when we administer the test, it's plus or minus 3 weeks earlier than it was last year. And the second piece was the question John asked, because on the state test using MAP, if you were projected, you're projected within grade level. When you sit for the state exam, if you're accelerated, you have the opportunity to earn bonus points within your accelerated course. Those are not part of that capture, correct? This is just straight numbers. So using that, we believe we were on track to exceed last year's results.
I guess the second macro thing that jumps out at me is if you just looked at accelerated advanced, you looked at ELA versus math, and again, I haven't looked at it in prior years, but you're running, depending on the building, somewhere between, I think, like 48% and 60% of ELA are in those categories, but on math, we're significantly higher, 70 to 75%. So are we starting to see a disparity where we've really doing, I don't know if it's math is just outpacing ELA or ELA is falling short? Well,
I think math, when you look at, there's probably a stronger correlation with math map, just because it's a straight calculation where the map ELA doesn't include English, doesn't include writing. And so there's a piece to the map that it gives us a great guide, but again, it's missing that writing piece, which is a significant portion of the ELA overall score. Did I answer your question?
I think so, but it couldn't, you still could be doing 70th, have 70% of your team and of your students in accelerated advanced without that writing score, right? Amongst the other categories that are graded, or do you maybe? And we can take it offline if it's,
I'm just trying to think of the calculation because that gets it a little bit into the weeds, but it's either 10 or 20 points of whether or not it's a 1 or 2 essay, depending on the grade level. So I'd have to go back and look at the specific percentage of the writing piece that's put into the score. I don't know it off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up.
okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Hey, just one more quick one, going back sort of off the ACT question. We're obviously wanting kids to take those tests, but we also want to make sure that they're taking enough classes to graduate. So based on where we are right now, do you know how many seniors have accumulated the required points, or how many we don't have that have accumulated the required points to graduate?
I have roughly 48 students that do not have 18 points at this point. But with the alternate pathways, I have state test scores from December will come back at the end of the month. So I have a lot of students that, I said of the 48, I think 10 or 12 of them would come off depending on the score that they received on a state assessment. Of the rest, we have already met with every senior that does not have their 18 points and have already started the alt pathways. So in December, they passed the alternative paths. So they have a list of, I think, 10 things that they can choose. They have to do 2 of them, such as a GPA in their senior year. Have they received College Credit Plus? There's a list of them. So every single senior that was potentially at risk, we have a plan in place in order to get them to graduation come May.
Good, thanks.
Quick question on the Rit Growth Targets.
Yeah.
Are those targets year-end goals, or are they going to change for year-end?
So these were just winter. So when I talked about that, math assumes a greater jump in learning. They see a higher RIT score. So these were winter observed growth scores that are shown on those graphs.
Another question on the ACT, and it may be for Mr. Sawyers as well. So when we calculate our mean score for New Albany, and we have a student who's taken the ACT multiple times, is it the mean of their mean, or is it their highest score that we count?
My answer, you want me to?
So if you look at the college readiness benchmark graduating class report that we get in the one that was so late coming out, we got it in October this year, it actually is of the highest of their last 3 times that they took the test. I also get a quality profile that is just for the class that took the state test. So I will get a report just on the 370 students that take the ACT on February 20th. So I'll have 2 different means. What we report on what we have for our benchmark is that graduating class report that looks at the top 3 scores, like the average of the highest of their last 3
Highest
times.
of their last 3. And you said you can take it free one time.
Junior year is provided by the state of Ohio.
What's the fee to take it again?
I believe it's 50. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
I was going to say 45, so it's somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
I know I just had to pay the late registration for my daughter, so it was 80. So don't quote me.
$46 with no writing, $62.50 if you take the writing test. There's a $29.50 late fee if you register late on top of that. So if you want writing, it's $62.50. No writing is $46. Just content. And that fee is waived for the February administration that we're about to do for the juniors.
Thank you.
The ACT does super score, Paul. So to the other piece of beyond just the mean for students, they will take it multiple times in the event to raise their score, but it does super score overall to give you the highest score possible for your composite. So it'll take, if you, for whatever reason, in this math administration, Debbie goes to take the test and she improves her math score, but she doesn't improve one of the other scores, it will not penalize her in the other areas. It will keep her highest score in each content area to super score the composite.
So we had 375 people that will take, 375 students will take it upcoming And history tells us how many will take that again. We can track that. How many will retake?
Yeah, we can look at that.
Yeah,
We have
off the
it.
top of my head, I don't, but I know exactly what.
I will tell you, if it's their first time administration with us, they're going to take it again. Most kids on average will take it 3 times. Because it does change your score. If you show up and haven't done anything, then you might get the same result. If you've done something in between the test administrations, and then depending on the content you have access to based upon what your schedule is, it might change your result on the ACT.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to the CIP benchmarks or the mid-year progress? No. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a number of board policies to discuss.
I gotta get back to the agenda. So we're
Get back to the agenda. Yeah.
I know it's board policy, but I gotta have it in front of me. So it's like, okay.
Yeah.
The second topic this evening is board policies, as President McClellan had indicated. Within the list that we provided to you this evening, there are 3 policies that are new. All the other policies reflect statutory changes either through Ohio Revised Code and or through federal statute. The 3 new policies, one is specifically being recommended through legal counsel through Neola for recess and adjournment provisions that are now captured in Ohio Revised Code, specifically to boards of education and the public records requirements associated to you. So there's a new policy for your recess and adjournment protocols. It used to be parliamentary rules of procedure. Now you actually have a policy that talks about how you recess a meeting or that you adjourn the meeting to make sure that you are in compliance with public records and sunshine law. That's the purpose of the policy. Procurement and use of the epinephrine auto injectors in emergency situations. So we worked with Mr. Hood and the school nurses based upon a medical emergency that had actually transpired within the school district that had a very positive outcome. But we did have an emergency use of an EpiPen for a student that did not have a prescription for an EpiPen at school. However, based upon the allergic reaction that he was experiencing, it was determined that it was necessary to administer the EpiPen, and it actually probably had a significant impact, even the potential of saving the kid's life. Based upon that, we met with pediatricians to have a conversation about emergency protocols that are permitted under Ohio Revised Code to administer EpiPens on the school campus, with the supervising pediatrician to issue the prescription to the school district to then provide an EpiPen to each school clinic. So we've now gone through that protocol. Mr. Hood's fulfilled that process with Susan Guy, the head nurse, and there's a policy that has to be put in place in order for us to be compliant, that we now have a prescription on file from a pediatrician giving us permission to administer in emergency situations the EpiPen for children if, in fact, they're having an allergic reaction to something that the parents did not know about. And the last one is school resource officer. This is an update in policy based upon the national and state standards that were issued related to school resource officers to implement, to have a policy in place. So we now have a memorandum of agreement with the New Albany Police Department, NAPD, screwing that up. It's focused on plain local schools. I'm so used to saying that. New Albany Police Department, we have to have a memorandum of understanding in place pursuant to Ohio Revised Code that we're going to have school resource officers on the school campus. So that's what the last policy actually does, is to create the relationship that we have had for years. It's now statutory that says we'll have an MOU in place with the police department authorizing the partnership between the Board of Education and the police department to have a school resource officer on site. Any questions about any of the policies?
Quick question about the EpiPen. That's a brand name?
Epinephrine?
No, EpiPen is a brand name.
Yeah, I shortened epinephrine into EpiPen.
In the policy,
Right.
listed as EpiPen. I mean, should it be EpiPen or its generic equivalent?
I think they're called EpiPens, aren't they, John?
It's actually our actual EpiPen.
Yeah, that's a brand name. There's a generic equivalent.
So we can modify that.
Do we need to have parents sign any special waiver that they're okay with us administering that in an emergency?
There's no medical outcome that's negative for a student. They can't be harmed by the administration. So if people would believe, school personnel believe the person's experiencing an allergic reaction, and in fact he or she's not, there's no byproduct of actually administration. So the pediatricians believe that we will be in compliance.
Okay.
Good question. And again, it's only for emergency usage.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. We have an opportunity for public participation. With no one here, we'll move on to superintendent's items. So could I have a motion for superintendent's items 5A and B?
So moved.
Second.
Bush, Mr. Newmoff, Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClelland. Personnel action items this evening are standard. We do have the approval of spring sports supplementals on the agenda this evening based upon the hiring of coaches for spring sports that will begin in March, based upon the respective dates in accordance with the Ohio High School Athletic Association. In addition to that, we have other supplemental contracts for volunteers that are being recommended for volunteers also for the spring sports season. Letter B this evening for general business includes an action item for early graduation. We have an additional student at New Albany High School that does meet all statutory requirements to be eligible to be considered an early graduate from New Albany High School. So she's presented this evening, and again, we'll have the same opportunity to come back for commencement in June, in May, should she so choose. Additionally, this evening, we have approval of purchase from the permanent improvement levy. We hadn't talked about the continued upgrade of Wi-Fi networks across the school district. Mr. Voss, as the Director of Technology, has completed the E-rate process necessary to submit for partial reimbursement. So the quote this evening for Think CSC for the primary school Wi-Fi work this summer will then go back through E-rate. We'll receive a 40% rebate of the dollar amount once the project is complete and it's certified to meet the standards for E-rate. So there will be a 40% rebate that comes back from the work. The balance short of that will be paid for the permanent improvement funds. Are there any questions I can answer?
With no questions, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
Vice President Darrow?
Yes.
President McClelland?
Yes. Now I'd like to entertain a motion to enter into executive session as permitted by the Ohio Revised Code for the purpose of considering the evaluation of a public employee or official.
So moved.
Mr. Darrow,
Second.
second by Ms. Kalinowski. And there will not be any action taken coming out of this executive session, so just want to make that clear. Could I have a roll call, please?
Vice President Darrow?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
President McClelland?
Yes. We are adjourned. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks, 25th.
We're into food service.